About 15,000 homes have been destroyed and more than 50,000 people have been made homeless following a massive fire which swept through a slum in Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka. So far, no deaths have been reported, but several people were injured. Many homes in the slums have plastic roofs which help the fire to spread. I spoke to Rani Singh, who's a reporter who covers Bangladesh and has been following events.
At the moment, people are not saying how it started, although in the Bangladeshi press, it's being reported that locals have said that there were some dwellings which had illegal gas connections, which were passed through plastic pipes, not the mandatory metal ones. So they're saying that's how it happened, for a start. But it's really a desperate situation. I've been into the biggest slum in Dhaka, and even there, the how the so-called dwellings are something like 10 foot by 5 foot, to house a whole family. People use kerosene lamps. They cook with gas. They leave rubbish outside the dwellings. Everybody's belongings is inside the little homes. So it's just a tinderbox waiting to happen.
Is it fair to say then the people that would have been caught up in this are the people that are least likely to be able to, cope with it, perhaps?
Yes, exactly. The garment workers, rickshaw pullers, housemaids, the lowest of the low, lowest of those with any power.
How long did it take firefighters to put the fire out, and what's happening now? Do you know?
I think it took about 3 hours. And to bring the worst of it under control, and they're still working away. But of course, it's left so many thousands homeless, and some of them are on the street, some of them are in open spaces allocated by government officials. But fortunately, in this case, many of them were away for the Muslim festival of Eid. They'd gone back to their villages and they'd locked their houses from the outside. So that's why the death count at the moment is as it is.
Well, as it is, we're being told
Yes.
that nobody's lost their lives
Yes,
as a result of that. That seems almost incredible, despite what you say, that a lot of people would have been away. And given the extent of the fire, is it credible?
I don't find it very easy to digest because although there's a census sort of held in many slums from time to time, every number of years, I don't know how, with a floating population, anybody would know exactly how many people were in there at any one time. So I don't know how they can say that there are no deaths. There have certainly been some injuries.
How do people end up in a slum like this, Rani?
Well, first of all, I better background it by saying that Dhaka is, I think, the second fastest growing megacity in the world. It's so congested. I've done so much work there for the BBC. Everybody from Bangladesh comes to Dhaka thinking that the streets are paved with gold. There might be floods and other things in their home provinces. And so they'll come here. Not only are the streets littered with people sleeping day and night, their day and night, but there's a huge influx into these various slums, and they really are enormous. I've been into the biggest one, which is supposed to be the best one, best run one, and even there the conditions are really diabolical. But they just come here because the country is poor, and they believe that this is where they're going to get work. So that's why there's a huge strain on the Dhaka authorities. They just can't contain it. I think the city grows by 500,000 each year.
But there is an attempt by the authorities to try and manage these slums then?
Yes, I mean, to some extent, and the biggest one that I went into, manage in the sense that there was a school in there. Women are given healthcare advice, and there's that sort of healthcare going on. And in the one I went into, there was a real attempt to give people employment. So at that level, there's support. There are a lot of charities in there. But in terms of health and safety and fire precautions and all of that. I haven't found any evidence of that in the slums I've been into.
Now, around 50,000 people will be homeless as a result of this fire. What will happen to them?
Well, a lot of them are on the street. As I said, in open spaces. I think they'll just try and find other places to live. But of course, their entire worldly possessions were in this slum, and for people already at the bottom of the pile, this means their entire life, their entire life's earnings, their furniture, whatever little they had, has gone up in flames, literally. So I've read stories of people coming back into the slum, even trying to find the charred remains of whatever they might have had in their tiny room, and even trying to sell that to scrap collectors. So, and people are now sort of pouring over the slum, many of the dwellers, to find stuff to sell so that they can sort of make something out of it. But I don't know what's going to happen to these slum dwellers. The country is overburdened, overstrained with the influx of Rohingya refugees, and Dhaka, as I see every time I go, is just so congested. It's uncontainable.
Will the slum be built back up?
You say built back up, Dotton, but these things aren't, they're not designed or constructed. People just put little dwelling upon little dwelling. They kind of create something. They'll find a plastic bit of, or some corrugated iron or something, and then just try and stick it together. It's just like making a playhouse, really. And that's why it's so easy to burn. These people make it themselves. And then, within weeks and months, you have a slum. But it's really very, very ad hoc. It's as if you were trying to make a kind of den, or if in your garden, that kind of thing, except that these dens are actual housing whole families, along with gas cookers and, lamps and just highly flammable materials.
No, I understand that. I just wonder whether people will try and rebuild their lives again on this very site.
It's going to be difficult because the first of all, the site's being, it's pretty much raised, a lot of it. So yes, I think they will try to. I think they're dazed and in shock, and obviously, how can you cater for the number of residents that were there? So they're completely bewildered. Yes, they will try because they'll stay in the city, and the city means work. The city means livelihood, and some means of survival, which is better than the villages or their home place that's just been flooded. So the city does represent the only means of hope for these Dhaka people.
And of course, Rani, forgive me. I know that we talked just the other day, actually,
yes.
about Kashmir. I thought
Yes.
it was a correspondent in Dhaka. That's why I was like, "Oh, have we spoken before?" And, apologies.
Yes.
Of course, I remember you very clearly.
Thank you very much. Yes, I report on all of these, and I not long ago went over and did a series on Bangladesh for the world, for the BBC Radio, and interviewed Sheikh Hasina and so on. So I've spent days in a slum and really having a look at it, and it was really scary then, looking at how tiny those places were, and I couldn't believe how whole families were living in a space very ingeniously, actually. But
and I imagine
yeah,
very unhygienic.
absolutely,
And
absolutely. Most of them don't have flushing toilets, and filthy conditions. Absolutely filthy conditions.
I know you say that people don't have much of a choice, but surely in the countryside or wherever they may come to the city, believing that the city streets are paved with gold, surely life is more bearable in the countryside, is it?
It might be prettier, it might be slightly less pollution, but they need to earn money. That they're absolutely on the poverty line. There's nothing for them, and all their entire village may have been flooded. You see, it's a very it's an area that's subject to flooding hugely, and whole villages can be wiped out. But the people are really, really poor, so they need to earn a livelihood. If you've got a child, you need to try and educate them or give them a place. But thereby is another tragic story, because you have so many street dwellers, and then their children may be kidnapped or, put into or trafficked or something like that. But these people they're so desperate, they'll come and sleep on the streets of Dhaka. And there's a whole movement to try and support them. But, you can walk around, you can go out at night, and you're stumbling over bodies.
How on earth can they earn a living in those conditions in Dhaka?
They believe they can, because there are factories, there are houses that want maids. That it represents more opportunity than living in a forest where there's nothing for them. Here there are people, even if they have to do it illegally, they'll still, they don't care. They're desperate, actually. They're desperate over there. There are people, for the street dwellers, for instance, there are certain charities which will give them means of livelihoods. They'll train them up to sell food and snacks on the streets, and they can bring themselves out of poverty. I interviewed one lady who was a street dweller. She had a daughter. She was picked up by this charity. She was trained to make and sell samosas, in vegetables, fried and wrapped in pastry, very tasty, and from little carts. And now she has a solid room. She's able to educate her daughter, and they have a future, mother and daughter. There are stories of success as well.
Rani Singh there.